The wind screamed across the empty platform like a wounded animal, driving needles of ice into every exposed inch of skin. Catherine Sullivan stepped down from the train onto wooden boards already white with accumulating snow, her worn leather boots finding uncertain purchase on the slippery surface. The conductor didn't wait for her trunk. He simply tossed it onto the platform with a thud that spoke of indifference, born from long miles and longer winters, then swung back aboard without a word of farewell or warning. The train pulled away with a grinding shriek of metal on metal, its black smoke swallowed almost instantly by the whirling white fury of the gathering storm. Within seconds, the platform stood empty except for Catherine and the growing drifts that seemed to have a hunger all their own. She was alone in Silverstone, Wyoming territory, and night was coming fast. Catherine pulled her thin wool coat tighter, though she knew it was useless against this kind of cold. Philadelphia winters could be harsh, but they were nothing like this. Nothing like the bone-deep chill that seemed to pull the very warmth from her lungs with each breath. She scanned the platform, the small station house, the single rutted road that disappeared into the white haze beyond. No one waited. No wagon, no horse, no tall figure stepping forward with recognition in his eyes. Samuel Crawford had promised to meet her train. His last letter, received 3 weeks ago in Philadelphia, had been specific. Friday, November 6th, 2 o'clock arrival. He would be there, he wrote, with the wagon and a warm blanket for the ride out to his forge. Catherine reached into her coat pocket, fingers numb even through her gloves, and pulled out that letter. The paper was soft from repeated reading, the creases deep. She had memorized every word during the 6-day journey west, but still she unfolded it now, as if the ink might have rearranged itself into an explanation for his absence. The words remained unchanged. 2 o'clock. He would be there. She folded the letter and returned it to her pocket, then bent to examine her trunk. Everything she owned in the world was packed inside that scarred leather box, 3 dresses carefully mended. Her mother's medical bag still containing the few instruments and herbs that hadn't been sold to pay for her mother's burial. Her father's account ledgers filled with his precise handwriting, the records of a careful man who had nonetheless died penniless from a factory fire that left his family with nothing but sympathy and empty promises. And at the very bottom, wrapped in her mother's shawl, the leather-bound journal that held 6 years of Catherine's own accounting work. Every transaction, every balance, every careful notation that had kept the Riverside textile mill running smoothly even as its owners took the credit and the profits. That journal was her proof, her credential, her only bargaining chip, if Samuel Crawford turned out to be less than his letters suggested. Catherine opened her small purse. Inside, the remnants of her life in Philadelphia clinked together with a sound as cold as the wind, $2.15. She had started the journey with $12 carefully saved over 2 years of working 14-hour days and eating 1 meal instead of 3. The train ticket had cost $8. Food for 6 days, another $1.70. That left her with barely enough for a single night's lodging, if she could find any in this town that seemed to consist of 1 empty platform and a locked station house. She looked toward what must be the main street of Silverstone. Through the driving snow she could make out the dark shapes of buildings, their windows glowing with lamplight that looked as distant and unreachable as stars. The temperature was dropping by the minute. Already Catherine's feet had lost feeling inside her boots. Her fingers were wooden things that barely responded to her commands. She could wait here, hoping Samuel would still come, or she could seek shelter in the town and face whatever questions and costs that would bring. Or she could do what the map in Samuel's second letter had outlined as a last resort: walk to the forge herself. The map had been detailed, drawn in the same careful hand as his letters. From the station, head north on Main Street, past the church, past the general store, out to where the buildings ended and the open land began. Follow the creek bed west for 2 miles. The forge sat on a rise above the water, close enough to hear the rush of snowmelt in spring, far enough to avoid flooding. He had added a note at the bottom: only if absolutely necessary. The walk is difficult in good weather. This was not good weather. This was the kind of weather that killed people. But Catherine had not traveled 2,000 miles to freeze to death on a train platform. She had not left her 14-year-old sister Mary in their aunt's care, promising to send money every month to give up now. She had not answered Samuel Crawford's carefully worded advertisement in the Boston Herald, had not spent 3 months exchanging letters with a man she'd never met, had not sold every possession of value, including her mother's silver mirror and her grandmother's cameo brooch, to turn back at the first sign of hardship. Catherine picked up her trunk. It was heavier than she remembered, seeming to gain weight with each step as she hauled it down the platform stairs and onto the main street. Snow had already accumulated to her ankles, and each step required effort that left her breathing hard in the thin, cold air. Main Street was deserted. The few buildings that lined it showed lights, but their doors were closed against the storm. Catherine passed a general store, a boarding house, with a painted sign that read, "Thornton's a Saloon," from which she could hear the muffled sound of men's voices and rough laughter. No one emerged to offer help or ask questions. In this weather, in this dying light, everyone with sense stayed inside. The church marked the northern edge of town, its white steeple barely visible against the darkening sky. Beyond it, the road became little more than a track, quickly disappearing under the accumulating snow. Catherine set down her trunk and pulled the map from her pocket again, though she could barely make out the lines in the fading light. The creek should be just ahead, running east to west. If she could find it, she could follow it to Samuel's forge. If she didn't freeze first, if she didn't lose her way in the storm, if the creek wasn't buried under snow, or if the forge wasn't farther than the map suggested. Catherine picked up her trunk again, feeling the weight of it drag at her shoulders, and started walking into the white emptiness beyond the town. The world narrowed to the next step, and the next, and the next. Snow filled her boots despite her careful walking. Her coat, already soaked through, might as well have been paper for all the warmth it provided. The trunk's handle cut into her palms, even through her gloves, but she couldn't set it down. If she set it down, she might not pick it up again, and everything she had, everything she was in that trunk. Time lost meaning. Catherine couldn't tell if she'd been walking for 10 minutes or an hour. The creek bed, when she finally stumbled into it, was marked only by a depression in the land and the skeletal remains of cottonwood trees that lined its banks. No water ran. Everything was ice and snow and the terrible sameness of white on white on white. She turned west, or what she hoped was west, and kept walking. Her mind began to play tricks. She saw lights that weren't there, heard voices in the wind's howl, felt her mother's hand on her shoulder, urging her to rest just for a moment, just long enough to catch her breath. Catherine knew these were the first whispers of the cold's final seduction. She had read about it in her father's books, had heard the stories from men who worked the winter docks in Philadelphia. The cold made you tired, made you want to sleep, made dying seem like the easier choice. She thought about Mary, 14 and bright, and trapped in their Aunt Patricia's house, where every meal came with a reminder of charity given and gratitude owed. She thought about the letters Samuel had written, his careful words describing a life of honest work and simple comforts, a partnership rather than a rescue. She thought about her mother's last words, whispered in a charity hospital bed with the smell of carbolic and death all around. Make something of yourself, Catherine. Don't just survive. Live. Catherine kept walking. The darkness was nearly complete when she saw it. A real light, this time steady and warm, glowing in the distance like a promise. She fixed her eyes on it and forced her frozen legs to move faster. The trunk banged against her shins with each step, but the pain was distant, happening to someone else's body. As she drew closer, the light resolved into a window, and the window into a building. Low and solid, built of stone and timber, with smoke rising from a chimney that spoke of fire and warmth and salvation. A forge it had to be. She could see the outline of an anvil through one window, the bulk of what might be a bellows near the back wall. Catherine made it to the door and raised her hand to knock, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. She stood there swaying, trying to make her frozen limbs obey. Then the door opened from the inside, and light flooded out along with a wave of heat that felt like a physical blow. A man filled the doorway, tall, broader through the shoulders than any man Catherine had seen in the city factories, with a face weathered by sun and wind and marked by a beard shot through with silver. His eyes were the color of smoke gray and assessing, and they widened as they took in Catherine's condition. "You're late," she tried to say, but her mouth wouldn't form the words. The world tilted sideways. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. When Catherine's eyes opened again, she was lying on something soft. Not a bed, but close. A pallet of blankets near a source of heat, so intense it almost hurt. She tried to sit up and found every muscle in her body screaming in protest. The cold had settled deep into her joints, and now the warmth was bringing all that frozen pain back to life. "Don't move yet." The voice was deep, roughened by years of breathing forge smoke. "You're not thawed through." Catherine turned her head, moving slowly, and found the man from the doorway crouched beside her. Up close she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard, the way his hands, large and scarred from years of working hot metal, rested gently on the blanket's edge, as if ready to pull it higher if she needed. "Samuel Crawford," she said. Her voice came out as a whisper, rough and uncertain. The man nodded once, his expression unreadable. "And you're Catherine Sullivan?" "From Philadelphia. You weren't at the station. I was late." His jaw tightened. "Storm came up faster than expected. By the time I got the wagon hitched and made it to town, the train was already gone. Station master said a woman got off alone, headed north on foot." He shook his head. "I've been searching for half an hour. You're lucky I found you when I did." "Another 20 minutes and you'd have been past finding." Catherine managed to push herself up on one elbow, though the effort left her dizzy. "Lucky," she repeated. The word tasted bitter. "I had to walk 2 miles in a blizzard because you were late." Something shifted in Samuel's expression. Not anger exactly, but a stiffening around the eyes that suggested she'd struck a nerve. "You're right," he said simply. "I was late. I'm sorry, but you're alive and that's what matters now. We can argue about blame once you're warm." He stood and moved to a work table, returning with a tin cup that steamed in the cold air. "Tea," he said, "strong and sweet. It'll help." Catherine took the cup with both hands, grateful for the warmth against her frozen fingers. The tea was indeed strong, almost bitter, but the sugar cut through it and sent a wave of warmth down her throat that reached all the way to her frozen core. She drank slowly, feeling life return to her limbs in painful increments. As her eyes adjusted to the light, Catherine began to take in her surroundings. The forge was exactly as Samuel had described it in his letters. A single large room, with the forge itself dominating one wall, its fire banked now, but radiating steady heat. Tools hung on every available surface, organized with a precision that spoke of a man who knew his craft. Hammers of every size, tongs, chisels, files. A massive anvil sat in the center of the space, its surface scarred by years of impact, but still solid and true. The air smelled of coal smoke and hot metal, and something else, something that might have been leather or oil, or simply the accumulated scent of hard work. Against the far wall stood a door closed now that presumably led to living quarters. And near that door, set apart from the working space, was a small area that looked newly prepared. A narrow bed with clean linens, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a trunk at the foot of the bed, and on top of that trunk, Catherine recognized with a start her own luggage. "You brought my things in," she said. Samuel nodded. "Didn't think you'd want them sitting in the snow." Catherine set down the teacup and forced herself to stand. Her legs shook, but they held. She moved toward the small prepared area, running her hand along the bed frame. It was simple but well made, the joints fitted with a craftsman's care. The linens smelled of lye soap and lavender, freshly washed. On the washstand sat not just the basin and pitcher, but also a small mirror, a comb, and a bar of what looked like real soap, not the harsh lye kind used for laundry. "You prepared this for me?" she said. It wasn't a question. I did. Samuel remained near the forge, as if giving her space to examine and to judge. "Your letters said you'd arrive November 6th. I wanted everything ready." Catherine turned to face him. In the forge light, she could see him more clearly. 40 perhaps, or a few years older. The gray in his beard suggested hard years, but his posture was straight, his movements economical and sure. He wore the simple clothes of a working man, canvas trousers and a heavy cotton shirt, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with the small scars that were a blacksmith's permanent decoration. "Your letters said you'd be at the station," Catherine said quietly. To his credit, Samuel didn't flinch from the accusation. "They did," he agreed. "And I should have been. There is no excuse good enough for leaving you stranded in a storm. All I can offer is the truth. The weather turned faster than I expected. I misjudged. And you nearly died because of it." The simple acknowledgment took the edge off Catherine's anger. She had expected defensiveness, justification, perhaps even blame. Instead, he gave her the one thing she needed most: honesty and the acceptance of responsibility. "I'm alive," she said finally. "As you said, that's what matters now." Samuel's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his expression remained serious. "You must be hungry. I've got stew on the fire in the house. Nothing fancy, but it's hot, and there's plenty." Catherine's stomach chose that moment to remind her that she hadn't eaten since morning, and then only a piece of hard bread saved from yesterday's meal. The thought of hot stew of real food, eaten somewhere warm and safe, was almost overwhelming. That would be welcome, she said. Samuel moved to the door that led to the house, then paused. "There's one more thing you should know," he said. "Before we go in, I'm not alone here." Catherine felt her heart drop. The letters had said nothing about a wife, but perhaps that had been an oversight, or worse, a deliberate omission. She braced herself for the revelation, for the knowledge that she had traveled 2,000 miles to become some kind of second woman in a household already complete. "I have a son," Samuel continued. "Eli. He's 16. His mother died when he was born. It's been just the two of us since." Relief and curiosity warred in Catherine's chest. The letters had mentioned loss, a wife who died young, but no mention of a child. "A son changes things," she said carefully. Samuel's expression was unreadable. "He does. Eli's a good boy, smart, hard-working when he wants to be, but he's at the age where he's not sure what he wants, and he's been without a mother his whole life. I won't lie to you, Miss Sullivan. Adding a woman to this household won't be simple, especially one who came here expecting one thing and found another." "What did I expect?" Catherine asked. Samuel met her eyes directly. "A partnership," he said. "That's what I offered in my letters. A chance to build something together, help with the business, someone to share the work and the profits. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, but an honest arrangement between two people who need what the other can provide." "And what do you need?" "Mr. Crawford." Samuel was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I need help," he said finally. "The forge does well enough, but I'm barely keeping the books straight. I lose track of who's paid and who owes. I spend so much time trying to sort the numbers that I'm not working the metal, and when I'm not working the metal, we don't eat. I need someone who can handle that side of things, someone I can trust." "And what do I need?" Catherine asked. Samuel looked at her steadily. "A home," he said. "Work that matters, the knowledge that you're not just surviving, but building something. And maybe, if we're both lucky, someone to share the load with." It was the most honest proposal Catherine had ever heard. No poetry, no promises of love or devotion, just the practical acknowledgement of two people who might make each other's lives better through simple partnership. "All right," she said. "Let's meet this son of yours." The house was connected to the forge by a short covered passage, protection against the worst of winter's weather. Samuel led the way, and Catherine followed, still unsteady on her half-frozen feet, but determined not to show weakness. The main room of the house was small, but well kept. A kitchen area occupied one wall with a cast-iron stove that radiated blessed heat. A table and 4 chairs sat near the center, and beyond that, 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. The walls were bare except for a few shelves holding dishes and cooking implements and a single photograph in a simple frame. Catherine's eyes went to the photograph. A woman, young and dark-haired, with serious eyes and a small smile. She wore a high-necked dress and held a bouquet of wildflowers. "That's Anna," Samuel said quietly. "Eli's mother. She died 16 years ago, come spring. She was beautiful," Catherine said, because it was true and because she didn't know what else to say. "She was," Samuel agreed. "And she was kind. Eli has her smile when he chooses to use it." As if summoned by his name, a door opened and a boy emerged. Not quite a boy, Catherine corrected herself. Eli Crawford stood perhaps an inch shorter than his father, with the same broad shoulders beginning to fill out and the same gray eyes. But where Samuel's face showed the marks of experience and hardship, Eli's was unformed, caught in that awkward place between childhood and manhood. His dark hair stuck up in several directions, and his hands, already large and work-roughened, seemed not quite under his control as he crossed the room. Eli Samuel said, "This is Miss Catherine Sullivan, from Philadelphia." Eli's eyes widened slightly as he took in Catherine's disheveled appearance, her soaked coat, her tangled hair escaping its pins. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking slightly on the single word. "Mr. Crawford," Catherine replied, offering a slight nod since a handshake seemed beyond her current capabilities. "Just Eli," the boy said quickly. "Nobody calls me Mr. Crawford except when I'm in trouble." Despite everything, Catherine felt a smile tug at her lips. "Then just Eli it is. And you may call me Catherine." Eli glanced at his father, who gave a barely perceptible nod. "Catherine, it is then." He paused, shifting his weight. "Pa said you were coming. Said you might be able to help with the books." "I hope so," Catherine said. "That's the plan anyway." "The books are a mess," Eli offered helpfully, then caught his father's look. "Not that it's Pa's fault. He's just better with metal than numbers." "Most people are," Samuel said dryly. "Get the bowls, Eli. Miss Sullivan needs food and warmth, not conversation about my failings with arithmetic." They ate together at the small table, and Catherine discovered that Samuel's description of the stew as nothing fancy had been accurate. It was simple, fair chunks of beef and vegetables in a thick broth, but it was hot and plentiful, and seasoned with enough salt to taste like luxury after days of bland train food. She ate with less grace than she would have liked, too hungry to care about appearances. Eli proved to be a constant source of nervous chatter, filling the silences with observations about the storm, the forge work, the state of the woodpile. Samuel said little, but Catherine noticed he watched her carefully, as if assessing something he couldn't quite put into words. When the meal was finished, Eli cleared the dishes without being asked, and Samuel poured coffee from a pot that had been warming on the stove. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, and Catherine drank it gratefully, feeling the last of the cold finally release its grip on her bones. "I know you must be exhausted," Samuel said, "but before you sleep there's something we should discuss, about the arrangement." Catherine set down her coffee cup and met his eyes. "Go on." Samuel glanced at Eli, who had finished with the dishes and now stood uncertainly near the door. "What I'm about to say isn't meant to offend," he began carefully. "But we need to be clear about expectations. You came here responding to my advertisement for a wife. That's what the letters discussed. But after what happened today, after nearly getting you killed through my own carelessness, I don't feel right holding you to that." Catherine frowned. "I don't understand. What I mean is," Samuel continued, his discomfort visible in the way he gripped his coffee cup, "you should have time to decide if this is really what you want. If I'm what you want. You traveled a long way based on letters, and letters can paint a prettier picture than reality delivers. So here's what I propose. Stay for a week. Help with the books if you're willing. Get to know the place and the work. At the end of that week, if you want to leave, I'll give you the fare back to Philadelphia, and enough extra to keep you comfortable until you find other arrangements. No obligations, no hard feelings. And if I stay?" Catherine asked. "Then we move forward as the letters outlined. Partnership first, marriage, when and if it feels right to both of us." Samuel's jaw tightened slightly. "I won't lie and say I don't need the help. I do. The forge is doing well enough, but I'm drowning in the details. And Eli needs," he paused, searching for words. "Eli needs to see what a proper household looks like, what partnership between man and woman can be. But those needs don't give me the right to trap you into something you didn't fully choose." It was the second time that evening Samuel had offered Catherine an escape route, and she found herself respecting him more for it. How many men, having gotten a woman to travel 2,000 miles, would then offer to send her home at their own expense? How many would acknowledge their own failures so plainly? "1 week," Catherine said. "That seems fair." Samuel nodded, relief evident in the loosening of his shoulders. 1 week. And to make it a proper trial, I should show you what you'd be getting into. Tomorrow, if you're recovered enough, I'll take you through the books, show you the forge operation, introduce you to some of the townspeople, let you see the reality instead of the pretty picture from the letters." "I'd like that," Catherine said, "but I have one condition of my own." "Name it." "At the end of the week, if I decide to stay, we don't wait months for the marriage. We do it right away, proper and legal." She met his eyes steadily. "I won't live in your house as something undefined, Mr. Crawford. If I'm to be here, I'll be here as your wife with all the respect and legal protection that entails. No more and no less." Samuel considered this, then extended his hand across the table. "Agreed," he said. "1 week to decide. If you stay, we marry immediately." Catherine shook his hand. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked for his living and didn't apologize for it. "Agreed," she said. Eli, who had been watching this exchange with wide eyes, cleared his throat. "So, does this mean Catherine is staying in the forge room tonight?" Samuel pulled his hand back and stood. "It does. The bed's ready, and it's warm enough with the forge fire." He looked at Catherine. "Unless you'd prefer to stay in town, I could take you to Thornton's boarding house." Catherine thought of her $2.15 of the cost of a room and the questions that would come with it. "I'll stay here," she said, "if that's all right." "It's more than all right," Samuel said. "It's practical. And around here, practical usually wins." He showed her back through the covered passage to the forge, where the fire had been built up again and the small sleeping area glowed with warmth and lamplight. Someone, probably Eli, had filled the water pitcher and laid out a towel. "There's a bolt on the inside of the door," Samuel said, pointing to the heavy wooden door that separated the forge from the passage. "Use it. Not that you need to worry, but I want you to feel safe." "Thank you," Catherine said. Samuel nodded and turned to go, then paused. "Miss Sullivan," he said. "Catherine, what you did today walking through that storm rather than giving up, that took more courage than most people have in their whole lives. Whatever you decide at the end of this week, I want you to know I see that. I respect it." Then he was gone, the door closing quietly behind him, leaving Catherine alone with the forge fire and her thoughts. She moved slowly, her body still protesting the abuse of the day, and opened her trunk. Everything inside was damp from the snow, but not ruined. She pulled out her nightgown and changed behind the screen someone had thoughtfully placed near the bed, then hung her wet clothes on a line strung near the forge to dry. Only when she was finally in the narrow bed, blankets pulled up to her chin, did Catherine allow herself to fully absorb what had happened. 24 hours ago she had been on a train traveling toward an unknown future with a mixture of hope and terror. 12 hours ago she had been standing on an empty platform alone and abandoned. 6 hours ago she had been walking through a blizzard that should have killed her. And now she was here in a blacksmith's forge in Wyoming territory with a week to decide if she would marry a man she'd met only hours before. The sensible thing, the safe thing would be to take his offer of return fare and go back to Philadelphia. Back to Aunt Patricia's grudging charity, back to the textile mill and its endless hours and meager pay. Back to a life where she was always 1 step from destitution and 2 steps from invisibility. But Catherine had not walked through a blizzard to choose the sensible thing. She thought about Samuel's hands, scarred and strong, shaking hers across the table. She thought about Eli's nervous chatter and the way he'd cleared the dishes without being asked. She thought about the photograph of Anna on the wall, the dead wife, whose absence shaped this household in ways Catherine couldn't yet fully understand. Most of all, she thought about Samuel's words. Partnership. Building something together. The knowledge that you're not just surviving, but building. That was what she wanted. What she had always wanted. Not rescue, not charity, but the chance to matter, to contribute something real, and have that contribution recognized. 1 week, Catherine thought, as sleep began to pull at her consciousness. 1 week to see if that possibility was real, or just another pretty picture that would fade in the harsh light of reality. Outside, the wind still howled, driving snow against the forge walls. But inside, the fire burned steady and warm, and Catherine Sullivan from Philadelphia slept the dreamless sleep of someone who had survived against odds and lived to face another day. She would wake tomorrow and begin the work of discovering whether survival was enough, or if something more, something better, might be built from the ashes of today's near disaster. The week stretched ahead, full of uncertainty and possibility in equal measure, and Catherine found herself almost eager to begin. Morning came with the smell of coffee and the distant ring of hammer on metal. Catherine woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds and the golden light filtering through the windows she didn't recognize. For a moment she was back in Philadelphia, in the narrow room she'd shared with Mary above their aunt's kitchen. Then memory returned in a rush. The train, the blizzard, Samuel Crawford's weathered face in the doorway. She was in Wyoming in a blacksmith's forge, and today would begin the week that would determine the rest of her life. She dressed quickly in the warmth of the forge fire, choosing her most practical dress, a dark gray wool that had seen better days but was sturdy and allowed for movement. Her other dresses were still damp from yesterday's ordeal, hanging on the line like ghosts of her former life. As she pinned up her hair, Catherine caught sight of herself in the small mirror Samuel had provided. Her face looked thinner than she remembered, sharpened by the journey and yesterday's trial. But her eyes were steady, and that was what mattered. The passage to the house was blessedly short, though the morning air bit with a cold that made yesterday's storm seem like a prelude. Catherine found the kitchen warm and bright, with Eli standing at the stove, flipping what looked like cornmeal cakes in a cast-iron skillet. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Pa said to let you sleep, but there's coffee if you want it. Cups are on the shelf there." Catherine poured herself coffee strong and black and took a seat at the table. "Where is your father at the forge already? Got an order for 20 horseshoes that needs finishing by end of week." Eli slid cornmeal cakes onto a plate and set it in front of her, along with a small jar of what looked like honey. "He works early most days. Says the metal heats better in the cold somehow, though I can't figure why that would be." The cornmeal cakes were simple but good, slightly crispy on the edges and soft in the middle. Catherine ate slowly, savoring the normalcy of a hot breakfast eaten at a proper table. When was the last time she'd had that? Not in the months of penny pinching before she left Philadelphia, certainly. Not on the train with its stale bread and questionable meat. This was the kind of breakfast that spoke of routine of a household that functioned with quiet efficiency. "Pa said you might want to look at the books today," Eli offered, refilling her coffee without being asked. "They're in the office. That's what we call the corner of the forge where he keeps the desk. Office is probably too grand a word for it, but Pa likes to pretend he's organized." "I'd like that very much," Catherine said. "And perhaps you could show me around, help me understand how everything works." Eli's face brightened. "I could do that. Fair warning, though, it's not complicated. Pa makes things people pay him. He writes it down, or tries to write it down. Sometimes he forgets until someone comes asking why they got charged twice or why he's claiming they never paid when they did." "That sounds like exactly the kind of problem I might be able to help with," Catherine said. After breakfast, Eli led her back through the passage to the forge. In daylight, the space was even more impressive than it had seemed last night. The forge itself dominated the room, a massive construction of brick and iron with a chimney that rose through the roof. The fire burned bright and hot, fed by coal from a bin against the wall. Samuel stood at the anvil, his back to them, bringing a hammer down in steady rhythmic strikes. Sparks flew with each impact, and the piece of metal on the anvil glowed orange, then yellow, then white hot, before Samuel plunged it into a water barrel with a hiss of steam. He turned at the sound of their entrance, his face streaked with soot and sweat, despite the morning cold. "Miss Sullivan," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're recovered, I am, thank you." Catherine gestured toward the anvil. "Please don't let me interrupt. Eli was going to show me the office." Something that might have been relief crossed Samuel's face. "Good, that's good." He hesitated, then added, "Fair warning, it's not pretty." The office was indeed not pretty. A battered desk stood in the corner farthest from the forge fire, covered in papers that seemed to have been organized by the principle of wherever they landed when tossed. A ledger book lay open its pages, filled with entries that ranged from neat and careful to barely legible scrawls. Stacks of what looked like receipts or invoices were piled haphazardly, some weighted down by random pieces of metal, others simply loose and threatening to scatter at the first strong breeze. Catherine felt something inside her wake up. This was a problem she understood. This was chaos that could be tamed with patience and system. This was work that mattered. She pulled out the desk chair and sat down, ignoring the way it wobbled on uneven legs. The ledger came first. She opened it to the first page and began reading. Samuel's handwriting varied wildly, depending on she assumed how tired or rushed he'd been when making the entry. Some entries were complete. Date, customer name, item, price, payment received. Others were fragments, just a name and a number, or a date and a description with no price at all. Eli peered over her shoulder. "It's bad, right?" "It's fixable," Catherine said, which was true, though the fixing would take considerable work. She pulled a blank piece of paper toward her and began making notes. Questions she would need to ask Samuel, systems she would need to implement, a proper filing method for receipts and invoices. She worked through the morning, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of accounting. Around her, the forge rang with the sound of Samuel's work. The steady clang of hammer on anvil, the roar of the bellows feeding air to the fire, the hiss of hot metal meeting water. It was music of a sort industrial and rhythmic, and Catherine found it didn't distract but rather helped her focus. By midday, she had compiled a list of 23 customers who appeared in the ledger with incomplete or contradictory information. Some showed items ordered, but no payment recorded. Others showed payment but no description of what had been purchased. A few appeared multiple times with different amounts that might represent running tabs or might simply be errors. "Samuel," she called across the forge. "Can you spare a moment?" He set down his hammer and crossed to the office, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What did you find?" Catherine turned the ledger to face him and pointed to an entry. "Thomas Garrett. Do you remember this transaction?" Samuel squinted at his own handwriting. That was, he paused thinking. March, maybe? He needed a new plow blade. Said his old one broke on a rock. And did he pay? Samuel's brow furrowed. "I think so. Or maybe he said he'd pay when he picked it up. Did he pick it up?" "According to this," Catherine said, tapping the ledger, "you have no record of payment and no note about whether the blade was delivered, which means either Mr. Garrett owes you money, or you owe him a plow blade, or the transaction is complete and you simply didn't record it properly." Samuel's jaw tightened. He stopped, then tried again. "I probably should have written that down better." "Probably," Catherine agreed. She gestured at her list. "I have 22 more examples just like this one. If I'm going to help you, I need to know which of these are actually owed, which are paid, and which are errors." "That's going to take some time to sort out," Samuel said. "It is," Catherine agreed. "Which is why I suggest we do it systematically. This afternoon I'll go through each name with you. You tell me what you remember, and I'll note it. Tomorrow I can start visiting these customers, politely asking them to clarify their accounts. Most people keep their own records. We can compare and figure out the truth. You do that, go door to door asking people about money they might or might not owe." Catherine met his eyes steadily. "That's what an accountant does, Mr. Crawford. We make order from chaos. And in my experience, most people are honest. If they owe money, they'll pay once reminded. If they don't owe anything, they'll say so, and we can correct your records. Either way, you'll know where you stand." Samuel was quiet for a moment, studying her face as if trying to read something written there. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, we'll do it your way. But I'm coming with you tomorrow. I won't have you going into strangers' homes alone asking about money. Not in this territory." "That's fair," Catherine said. She stood smoothing her skirt. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I should help Eli with the midday meal, unless there's something else you need from me." "Just one thing," Samuel said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This is what I keep for household expenses. There's about $15 in there. If you're going to be managing the books, you should manage this too. Buy what you need for cooking, for supplies, whatever makes sense. Just," he paused, "keep track of it. So I know where the money goes." Catherine took the pouch, feeling the weight of the coins inside. It was more money than she'd held in months, and the trust implicit in handing it over to a woman he'd known less than a day was not lost on her. "I'll keep a household ledger," she said. "Every penny accounted for." "I'd expect nothing less," Samuel said, and there might have been the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. The afternoon passed in careful interrogation. Catherine worked through her list of questionable accounts while Samuel dredged up memories of conversations and handshake deals. Some he remembered clearly. Thomas Garrett had indeed paid for the plow blade in cash the day he picked it up. Samuel simply hadn't recorded it. Others were murkier. A rancher named Donovan might have paid half up front for a set of gate hinges, or he might have promised to pay half, or Samuel might be completely misremembering the conversation. By the time the light began to fail, Catherine had her list reorganized into 3 categories: definitely owed, probably owed, and requires investigation. The definitely owed column totaled $187 a sum that made Samuel's eyes widen when she showed him. That much he asked. At minimum, Catherine confirmed, and possibly more once I verify the uncertain accounts. When did you last do a proper accounting? Samuel had the grace to look embarrassed. Never did one proper, if I'm honest. I just tried to keep track as I went. Didn't always succeed. Well, Catherine said, closing the ledger with a sense of satisfaction. That's about to change. Dinner that night was a quiet affair. Eli had made a passable stew from salt pork and root vegetables, and they ate by lamplight with the wind howling outside. The storm from yesterday had passed, but winter had settled in with a determination that suggested it would not be leaving soon. Tomorrow, Samuel said, breaking the comfortable silence, I thought we'd start with the closer accounts. People in town, save the ranches for when the weather clears a bit. That makes sense, Catherine agreed. Who should we visit first? Garrett, probably. He's got the general store. If anyone's going to have records to compare against, it's him. Samuel paused. You should know people are going to be curious. About you, about why you're here. Let them be curious, Catherine said. I have nothing to hide. I'm here on trial, as we agreed, helping with the books. If that's not respectable enough for Silverstone, Wyoming, then I don't know what would be. Eli looked up from his stew. Are you really going to marry Pa? If you stay, I mean... The direct question hung in the air. Samuel looked like he wanted to intervene, but Catherine raised a hand, slightly stopping him. If I stay, she said, looking directly at Eli. Yes, that's the agreement. 1 week to decide if this arrangement suits us both. If it does, your father and I will marry, properly and legally. And if it doesn't suit, Eli asked, then I'll go back to Philadelphia and your father will continue as he has been. No harm done. Eli considered this, his young face serious. I think you should stay, he said finally. Pa needs help, and the house is better with someone else in it. Less quiet. Samuel cleared his throat. That's enough, Eli. Miss Sullivan doesn't need you lobbying for her to stay. I'm just saying what I think, Eli protested. You're always telling me to speak my mind. Speaking your mind and pestering our guest are two different things. It's all right, Catherine said. I appreciate honesty. From both of you. She stood collecting the dishes. Now I believe it's my turn to clean up. You two have been feeding me for 2 days. Time I contributed something besides bookkeeping. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Catherine dressed in her warmest clothing, which still seemed inadequate for Wyoming winter, and joined Samuel for the walk into town. Eli stayed behind to mind the forge tasked with keeping the fire hot and completing some simple repair work. The walk to Silverstone took 20 minutes, following the same creek bed Catherine had stumbled along 2 nights before. In daylight, without a blizzard obscuring everything she could see, the path was actually well maintained, worn smooth by regular traffic. The town itself was larger than she'd realized, with perhaps 30 buildings lining the main street and spreading out into the side lanes. Samuel led her to the general store, a 2-story building with a painted sign that read, Garrett's Mercantile. The proprietor, Thomas Garrett, was a man in his 60s, with shrewd eyes and hands that moved with constant efficiency, reorganizing stock even as he spoke. Sam, he said in greeting, and this must be the young lady who walked through a blizzard. Stories all over town. News travels fast, Samuel said dryly. Tom, this is Miss Catherine Sullivan from Philadelphia. She's helping me sort out my accounts. That's so, Garrett's eyes sharpened with interest. Well, about time someone did. No offense, Sam, but your bookkeeping is worse than your handwriting, and that's saying something. None taken, Samuel said. Catherine has a question about a transaction from March. Catherine pulled out her notes. A plow blade for Thomas Garrett. The ledger shows it was made and delivered, but there's no record of payment. Can you clarify? Garrett frowned, then moved to a cabinet behind his counter. He pulled out his own ledger, far neater than Samuel's, and flipped through the pages. March, you said. Here it is. Plow blade, $6 paid in cash. March 23rd when I picked it up. He turned the ledger to show them. I keep good records. I'm sure you do, Catherine said. This is exactly what I needed. Thank you. She made a note in her own book. 1 down, 22 to go. They spent the morning visiting businesses and homes in town, cross-referencing accounts. Most people, as Catherine had predicted, were honest and helpful. They had their own records and were happy to clarify what was owed or what had been paid. A few tried to claim they'd already paid when Samuel's increasingly clear memories suggested otherwise, but Catherine's polite persistence and careful notation usually brought them around. By noon, they had resolved 15 of the 23 questionable accounts. More importantly, Catherine had collected $112 in payments for debts that were definitely owed. The money felt heavy in the small bag Samuel had brought for the purpose. "You're good at this," Samuel said, as they walked toward Thornton's boarding house for one final stop. "People don't argue with you the way they do with me." "That's because I'm not arguing," Catherine said. "I'm just asking questions and writing down answers. And I'm a stranger. It's easier to be honest with someone you don't see every day," maybe Samuel said. "Or maybe you just have a way about you that makes people want to cooperate." They found Ida Thornton in her kitchen, a large room that smelled of baking bread and cinnamon. Ida was a woman of perhaps 50 with silver hair pinned in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wiped flour from her hands and pulled out chairs for them without being asked. So she said, settling herself across the table from Catherine, "You're the mail-order bride." "I'm Catherine Sullivan," Catherine said evenly. "I'm here on a trial basis helping Mr. Crawford with his accounts. Call him Samuel Dear. Everyone does. And I'm Ida." She poured coffee without asking if they wanted any. "You walked through that blizzard 2 nights ago. Foolish thing to do," it was Catherine agreed. "But I didn't know how foolish until I was already committed." Ida's expression softened slightly. "That's the way of most foolish things, I suppose. You survive them and learn better." She turned to Samuel. "What brings you here, Sam? I don't owe you money for anything. Haven't needed the forge in months. Actually," Catherine said, "according to Mr. Crawford's records, he owes you money." Ida's eyebrows rose. "That's so," Catherine consulted her notes. "Last April, you provided room and board for a traveling apprentice Samuel had hired. The apprentice stayed 2 weeks before deciding the work wasn't for him and moving on. The note in the ledger says payment pending, but there's no record of the debt being settled." Ida frowned, thinking, that would have been young Peterson. Ate like a horse and complained about everything. She nodded slowly. "Sam did say he'd pay me now that I think on it. But he never did, and I never pressed because the boy was so much trouble, I figured we were even." "That's not fair to you," Catherine said firmly. "Room and board for 2 weeks. What would that typically cost?" $3 a week, Ida said. "But like I said, I'm not worried about it." $6 then," Catherine said, writing in her ledger. "Mr. Crawford will settle the debt today." Samuel pulled $6 from the payment bag and placed them on the table. "I should have remembered," he said. "I'm sorry, Ida." Ida looked at the money, then at Catherine, then back at the money. She took the bills and tucked them into her apron pocket. "You keep this up," she said to Catherine, "and Sam's going to have the cleanest books in the territory, might even know what he's worth for once." "That's the plan," Catherine said. Ida's expression turned assessing. "You know what you're doing, girl. I'll give you that. How long are you planning to stay? 1 week?" Catherine said. "Then I'll decide if this arrangement suits me, and if it doesn't, then I'll return to Philadelphia." Ida snorted. "You walked through a blizzard to get here. You're not going back." She stood and moved to her oven, pulling out a loaf of bread that filled the kitchen with its warm, yeasty smell. "Take this," she said, wrapping it in a cloth and handing it to Samuel. "Consider it payment for finally settling that debt. And, Catherine, you come see me before the week's out. I want to know how this all turns out." "I will," Catherine promised. As they walked back toward the forge, Samuel carried the bread and the considerably lighter payment bag. "You made a friend there," he said. Ida doesn't give bread to people she doesn't like, and she doesn't invite them to visit unless she means it." Catherine filed this information away. It was good to know she had at least one ally in Silverstone, whatever she decided at the end of the week. The afternoon brought unexpected crisis. They had just returned to the forge and were settling in to tackle the remaining accounts when a rancher named Donovan arrived riding hard and leading a second horse that limped badly. "Sam," he called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "I need help. Mare threw a shoe and went lame. My boy's sick with fever, and I need the doctor from Cheyenne. Can't wait for her to heal on her own." Samuel was already moving toward the forge fire, stoking it hotter. "Bring her in. Let me see the hoof." Donovan led the limping mare into the forge area, talking in a low, soothing voice. The horse was clearly in pain, favoring the injured leg. Samuel crouched beside her, running his hands down the leg with surprising gentleness for a man with such large, scarred hands. "Not just the shoe," he said after a moment. "She's got an abscess forming, probably from dirt getting into the quick when the shoe came off." He looked up at Donovan. "This is going to take time. An hour, maybe more. I need to clean it out, pack it, and make a new shoe fitted proper so she doesn't throw it again." "I'll wait," Donovan said. "My boy needs that doctor." Samuel nodded and turned toward his tools, then stopped, his face going still. Catherine recognized the expression. He was calculating something and coming up short. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. "I need Eli," Samuel said. "Can't hold the horse and work the forge at the same time. But Eli's not—" He paused, searching for words. "He's not quite ready for this kind of work. Makes him nervous, and horses can tell." "I could help," Catherine offered. Samuel turned to look at her, surprise evident on his face. "You know horses. I grew up in the city," Catherine said. "I know nothing about horses, but I can follow instructions. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." For a moment, Samuel hesitated. Then Donovan spoke up. "Time's wasting, Sam. If the lady's willing, let's get started." "All right," Samuel said. He gestured Catherine closer. "Stand here by her head. Keep your hand on her neck. Talk to her. Doesn't matter what you say, just keep your voice calm and steady. If she starts to panic, let me know immediately. Don't try to hold her if she wants to bolt. Understand?" Catherine positioned herself as instructed, placing her hand on the mare's neck. The horse was warm and solid, her muscles twitching under the skin. Catherine could feel the animal's tension, the pain and fear radiating through her powerful frame. "What's her name?" Catherine asked Donovan. "Sadie," the rancher said. "Hello, Sadie," Catherine said softly, pitching her voice low and even. "I know you're hurting, but Mr. Crawford is going to help you. He's very good at his work. You just need to be patient a little longer." The mare's ear swiveled toward Catherine's voice, and some of the tension seemed to ease slightly. Catherine kept talking a steady stream of nonsense about the weather and the bread Ida had given them and how Philadelphia had looked in winter. It didn't matter what she said. What mattered was the tone, the steady presence, the hand on the neck, saying, "You're not alone." Samuel worked with focused intensity. He cleaned the abscess with careful precision, flushing it with some kind of solution that made Sadie flinch and stamp. Catherine felt the mare's muscles bunch, ready to bolt, and increased the pressure of her hand slightly, her voice never wavering. "You're doing fine, Sadie. Almost done now. Just a little longer." Samuel packed the cleaned wound with what looked like a poultice, then wrapped it with clean cloth. Then he turned to the forge heating metal until it glowed white-hot. The shoe he made was a work of art, fitted and shaped with a precision that came from years of practice. When he finally nailed it in place, Sadie barely twitched. "There," Samuel said, stepping back and wiping sweat from his face despite the cold. "That should hold her. Keep that hoof clean and dry for a week. Change the packing every 2 days. If the abscess doesn't clear up, send word, and I'll come out to the ranch." Donovan tested the mare's gait, leading her in a slow circle. The limp was still there, but greatly improved, and Sadie moved with more confidence. "What do I owe you, Sam?" $8, Samuel said, "for the shoe and the treatment." Donovan pulled out his wallet, then paused. "I don't have 8 on me. Got 6. Can I bring you the rest next week?" Samuel glanced at Catherine. She gave a small nod and pulled out her ledger, making a notation. $6 paid today, she said. $2 owed due next Tuesday. Donovan handed over the $6, relief evident on his weathered face. "Thank you, Sam. And, ma'am," he added to Catherine, "you've got a way with horses. Sadie doesn't take to strangers usually." After Donovan left riding Sadie at a careful walk, Samuel turned to Catherine. "That was," he paused. "You were good with her, the horse. I just did what you said." "No," Samuel said. "You did more than that. You kept her calm when most people would have made her more nervous. That's a gift." Catherine looked down at her hands, still slightly dusty from the mare's coat. "It felt good," she said quietly. "Being useful, helping something heal. That's what we do here," Samuel said. "We fix things, metal usually. But sometimes animals, sometimes people." He met her eyes. "You fit in better than I expected, Catherine Sullivan. It's only been 3 days," she reminded him. 3 days that feel longer, Samuel said, in a good way. Like you've been here all along and I just didn't notice the empty space until you filled it. The words hung between them more intimate than Samuel probably intended. Catherine felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with the forge fire. "I should start on dinner," she said, breaking the moment. "Eli will be hungry." That evening, after a meal of Ida's bread and the remains of yesterday's stew, they sat around the table while Catherine updated the ledger with the day's transactions. $118 collected, $6 paid out to Ida Thornton, $2 owed by Donovan, 23 questionable accounts reduced to 8. "At this rate," Samuel said, watching her write, "you'll have my entire financial life sorted by the end of the week." "That's the plan," Catherine said. She closed the ledger and looked up at him. "Can I ask you something, anything? Why did you place that advertisement for a wife, I mean? You're clearly managing well enough on your own." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Eli had already gone to bed and the house was still except for the pop and crackle of the fire in the stove. "Managing isn't the same as living," he said finally. "After Anna died, I threw myself into the work. Built the forge raised. Eli kept going because that's what you do. But somewhere along the way, I realized I'd built a life that was all function and he struggled for the word, no warmth. No partnership, just me and Eli getting by." "You wanted someone to share the load," Catherine said, understanding. "I wanted someone to share everything," Samuel corrected. "The work, yes. But also the quiet moments, the morning coffee, the satisfaction of a job well done." He met her eyes. "I wanted what I had with Anna before she died, that sense of being part of something bigger than yourself." Catherine thought about her own life in Philadelphia, the endless days at the textile mill, the nights in her aunt's house always aware she was there on sufferance, the growing certainty that this was all there would ever be unless she took a risk. "I understand that," she said quietly, "more than you might think." The week continued in a rhythm that began to feel almost natural. Mornings at the forge working through the account ledgers, afternoons visiting customers, collecting payments, clarifying debts, evenings helping with meals and household tasks, the three of them settling into a routine that felt less like awkwardness and more like family with each passing day. By Thursday, Catherine had resolved all but 2 of the questionable accounts, and those 2 required trips out to distant ranches that would have to wait for better weather. She had collected a total of $270 in outstanding debts, more than Samuel had thought possible. The money sat in a locked box in the office, carefully counted and recorded. "You've nearly doubled my working capital," Samuel said, looking at the figures with something like wonder. "I could buy new tools, upgrade the bellows, maybe even hire seasonal help for the busy months. Or you could save it," Catherine suggested, "for lean times, for emergencies." Samuel grinned. "You sound like a banker." "I sound like someone who's been poor," Catherine corrected. "Money in reserve is the difference between weathering hard times and losing everything." "Fair point," Samuel conceded. That night, after dinner, Samuel asked Catherine to walk with him. "Just to the forge and back," he said. "I want to show you something." They bundled against the cold and stepped out into a night so clear the stars seemed close enough to touch. The moon was nearly full, turning the snow-covered landscape into something otherworldly and beautiful. Samuel led her to the forge and pulled back a canvas covering a workbench Catherine hadn't paid much attention to before. Underneath lay a piece of metalwork unlike anything Catherine had seen, a rose crafted entirely from iron with petals so delicate they seemed ready to unfold. Each petal was shaped and textured to catch the light, creating shadows and highlights that made the static metal seem almost alive. "I started this the day I got your first letter," Samuel said quietly. "Been working on it in spare moments ever since. Every petal took hours. Had to heat the metal just right, hammer it thin enough to show detail, but thick enough to hold its shape." He ran a finger along one petal. "It won't wilt like a real flower, won't fade or die. It'll last as long as the metal holds together, which is pretty much forever if it's cared for." Catherine stared at the iron rose, her throat tight. "It's beautiful," she managed. "It's for you," Samuel said, "if you stay. If you decide this life, this place, this partnership is what you want." He met her eyes. "I know it's not much, just a piece of worked metal, but it represents something. Every hour I spent on it, I was thinking about you, about the woman whose letters made me believe in second chances, about the possibility that maybe my life wasn't done being lived just because Anna died." Catherine reached out and touched one petal, feeling the cool smoothness of the metal. "How many hours?" she asked. Samuel smiled. 40, maybe 50. Hard to say exactly. I lost track. 50 hours of work, Catherine said softly. "For someone you'd never met. For someone I hoped to meet," Samuel corrected. "Someone I hoped would take a chance on a widowed blacksmith with a teenage son and questionable bookkeeping skills." Catherine felt something shift inside her, a decision crystallizing that had been forming all week without her quite realizing it. She turned to face Samuel fully. "Ask me," she said. "Ask you what you want to ask, what you've been building toward with this gift and these conversations, and the way you've been watching me all week, like you're trying to memorize my face." Samuel took a breath, and Catherine could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of rejection warring with hope. "Catherine Sullivan," he said, "will you stay? Not for the week's trial, but for real. Will you marry me and build a life here with Eli and me? Will you be my partner in all of this?" "Yes," Catherine said. The word came out clear and certain, surprising her with its simplicity. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, to all of it." Samuel's face transformed relief and joy, chasing away the tension that had marked his features. "You're sure?" he asked. "Because once we do this, once we marry, there's no going back. I need you to be certain." "I am certain," Catherine said. She gestured at the account books visible through the forge office window. "You need someone who can manage the business side. Eli needs someone who can teach him there's more to life than just work. And she paused, searching for the right words, "I need to matter, to build something real, to be part of a partnership where my contributions are valued. You're offering me all of that." "I am," Samuel confirmed. "And I promise you, Catherine, whatever we build here, we build together. Equal partners." "Equal partners," Catherine repeated. She held out her hand, and Samuel took it, his grip warm and calloused and steady. They stood there in the moonlit forge, hands clasped the iron rows gleaming on the workbench behind them. Tomorrow they would ride to town and speak to Reverend Hayes about arranging a marriage. Tomorrow the reality of what they'd agreed to would begin to take shape. But tonight, in this moment, it was enough to have made the choice, to have stepped into uncertainty and found something solid on the other side. "We should tell Eli," Samuel said finally. "We should," Catherine agreed. "He'll be pleased. He's been lobbying for me to stay since the first morning." Samuel laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "That boy has no subtlety. Gets it from his mother. Anna was the same way. Spoke her mind and let the chips fall where they may." "Tell me about her," Catherine said. "About Anna. If we're going to do this, I should know. Not to compete or compare, but to understand." Samuel nodded slowly. They walked back toward the house, and as they did, he talked. About Anna, the carpenter's daughter from Cheyenne, who'd agreed to marry a struggling young blacksmith with more ambition than sense. About how she'd worked alongside him in the forge, unafraid of the heat or the hard labor. About her laugh, which had filled their small house with warmth. About the difficult pregnancy and the birth that went wrong, the midwife's helpless face, the knowledge that he could save the baby or the mother, but not both. "She told me to save Eli," Samuel said quietly as they reached the house. "Made me promise. Said she wanted a piece of herself to live on, and that piece was our son." He paused with his hand on the door. "I've tried to honor that, to raise Eli the way she would have wanted, but I know I've failed in some ways. He needs more than I can give him alone." "He needs a mother," Catherine said gently. "He needs someone who isn't drowning in grief and guilt," Samuel corrected. "Someone who can see him for who he is, not just as Anna's legacy." He looked at Catherine. "You're good with him, patient. You ask him questions and actually listen to his answers. That's more than I've managed in 16 years. "You're too hard on yourself," Catherine said. "Eli is a good boy, kind, helpful, curious. That doesn't happen by accident." They found Eli still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a book open in front of him. He looked up as they entered, his eyes going from Samuel's face to Catherine's and back again. "You're smiling," he said to his father. "Both of you are smiling." "Catherine's agreed to stay," Samuel said. "We're getting married," Soon as Reverend Hayes can arrange it." Eli's face lit up with a grin that transformed him from serious teenager to the boy he still partly was. "Really?" He stopped searching for words adequate to his excitement. "That's good. That's really good. We'll need to make some arrangements," Catherine said, settling into the practical because emotion threatened to overwhelm her. "I'll move my things from the forge to the house. We'll need to speak to the Reverend to arrange the ceremony. And I should write to my sister, let her know what's happening. I'll help," Eli offered immediately, "with whatever you need." "Thank you, Eli," Catherine said. She met his eyes directly. "I know this is a big change. If you have concerns or questions, you can ask me. Any time." Eli nodded, suddenly serious. "Just one question." "All right. Are you going to make Pa keep better books? Because, honestly, watching him try to do arithmetic is painful." Samuel made a sound that might have been indignation, but Catherine laughed. "Yes," she promised. "I'm going to make him keep much better books." "Then I have no concerns," Eli declared. "Welcome to the family, Catherine." The simplicity of it, the straightforward acceptance, made Catherine's throat tight. "Thank you," she said. "I'll try to be worthy of that welcome." "You already are," Eli said, then returned to his book as if the entire trajectory of their lives hadn't just shifted. That night, Catherine lay in the bed in the forge room for what would be one of the last times. Tomorrow she would move to the house, to the room that had been Anna's and would now be hers and Samuel's. The thought should have been frightening, but instead it felt right. Natural, even. She thought about the week that had passed, the blizzard that had nearly killed her, the accounts she'd sorted and the money she'd collected, the way Sadie the mare had calmed under her hand, the iron rose that represented 50 hours of hope from a man who'd thought his capacity for hope had died with his wife. Most of all, she thought about Samuel's words. Equal partners, building something together. That was what she'd come west to find. Not romance, not rescue, but partnership, the chance to matter, to contribute, to be part of something larger than her own survival. And now, improbably, she'd found it. In a blacksmith's forge in Wyoming Territory with a widowed craftsman and his teenage son, and account books that had been a disaster before she'd arrived. Catherine smiled into the darkness. Philadelphia seemed very far away now, and that distance felt like freedom. Tomorrow she would begin the next chapter, but tonight she let herself simply rest in the satisfaction of a choice well made. Outside the wind whispered around the forge walls, but inside the fire burned steady and warm. And Catherine Sullivan, soon to be Catherine Crawford, slept dreamlessly secure in the knowledge that she had walked through a blizzard and found on the other side exactly what she'd been searching for all along. A home, a purpose, a partnership, and an iron rose that would never wilt, never fade, never die. Just like the commitment she'd made and the life she was about to build. Friday morning arrived with the kind of cold that made breathing hurt and turned exhaled breath into clouds of white mist. Catherine woke early in the house now, in the room that had been prepared for her, though not yet in the bed she would share with Samuel after the wedding. That propriety, at least, they would observe. The marriage was set for Sunday, 2 days hence, with Reverend Hayes officiating in the small church at the edge of town. She dressed carefully in her best dress, the dark blue wool she'd saved for special occasions. Today they would ride into Silverstone to make the final arrangements, to post the banns as custom required, even though the waiting period would be waived, and to face the inevitable questions and scrutiny that came with a hasty marriage in a small town. Samuel was already at the forge when Catherine entered through the connecting passage. He looked up from the piece he was working, a set of decorative hinges for the new bank being built in Cheyenne, and his face softened when he saw her. "You look—" He paused, searching for words. "That's a fine dress." "Thank you," Catherine said, smoothing the skirt self-consciously. "I thought I should look presentable for town." "You always look presentable," Samuel said. Then, as if realizing how that sounded, he added quickly, "I mean, not that you need to impress anyone. Just that you—" He stopped, looking frustrated with himself. "I understand," Catherine said, taking mercy on him. "And thank you." Eli appeared from the house, already bundled against the cold. "The wagon's ready," he announced. "I hitched Molly and checked the wheels. Should be a smooth ride." The trip to Silverstone took longer by wagon than on foot, following the main road rather than the creek bed shortcut. Catherine sat beside Samuel on the bench seat wrapped in a thick wool blanket, while Eli perched in the back among the tools and supplies Samuel was delivering to various customers. The town was busier than Catherine had seen it before. Market day, Samuel explained as they passed farmers setting up stalls along the main street. People come in from the surrounding ranches. Good day to be seen together, actually. Word will spread faster. Is that what we want? Catherine asked. Word to spread. Samuel glanced at her, his expression serious. I won't hide what we're doing, Catherine. We're getting married, building a life together. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. The firmness in his voice settled something in Catherine's chest. She had worried, though she hadn't voiced it, that Samuel might be embarrassed by the circumstances of their arrangement, that he might present their marriage as something forced by necessity rather than chosen by both of them. Their first stop was the church, a simple white building with a steeple that seemed too grand for the structure beneath it. Reverend Thomas Hayes met them at the door, a man in his mid-60s, with kind eyes and the weathered hands of someone who'd done hard labor before taking up the ministry. Samuel, he said, warmly shaking hands, and this must be Miss Sullivan. I've heard quite a bit about you. Nothing too scandalous, I hope, Catherine said. Reverend Hayes smiled. Only that you walked through a blizzard and survived, then proceeded to sort out Sam's account books in less than a week, both of which speak well of your character. They settled in the Reverend's small office, where Hayes pulled out the parish register and began making notes. Marriage on Sunday, he confirmed. 2:00 if that suits. I'll need witnesses, of course. Eli will stand for me, Samuel said. And perhaps Ida Thornton for Catherine. I'll ask her, Catherine said. I'm sure she'll agree. Hayes set down his pen and looked at them both with an assessing gaze that felt pastoral rather than judgmental. I have to ask, he said gently. This is very quick. Are you both certain this is what you want? We are, Samuel said firmly. Catherine nodded. We've discussed it thoroughly, Reverend. This isn't a decision made lightly. Hayes studied them for another moment, then smiled. Good. Marriage is work, you know. The ceremony takes 10 minutes, but building together lasts a lifetime. You'll have arguments, disagreements, days when you wonder what you were thinking. He leaned forward. The key is remembering you're on the same side, even when it doesn't feel like it. We understand, Catherine said. Do you? Hayes asked. Because I've married dozens of couples in my time, and the ones who last are the ones who see marriage as building together, not a romance. Romance fades. Working side by side, if you build it right, only gets stronger. That's what we want, Samuel said. We've been clear about that from the start. Hayes nodded, satisfied. Then I'll see you Sunday at 2. Wear something that makes you feel married, not just dressed up. This is a sacrament, not a performance. They left the church and made their way to Thornton's boarding house. Ida greeted them at the door, took one look at their faces, and ushered them inside with a knowing smile. You've set a date, she said. It wasn't a question. Sunday, Catherine confirmed. 2:00 at the church. I was hoping you might stand as my witness. Ida's expression softened. I'd be honored, dear. Truly honored. She bustled toward her kitchen. Sit, both of you. I'll make coffee and we'll discuss arrangements. Over coffee and fresh-baked biscuits, they talked through the practical details. Catherine had no family to invite, though she would write to her sister Mary with the news. Samuel's only family was Eli. The ceremony would be simple, the gathering afterward, even simpler, just a meal at the Forge House for whoever wanted to attend. You'll need a proper dress, Ida said firmly. That blue wool is fine, but for your wedding, you should have something special. I can't afford, Catherine began. Didn't say you had to buy it, Ida interrupted. I have a dress. Cream-colored silk, barely worn. My daughter's wedding dress before she moved east with her husband. She won't mind you borrowing it, and I think it'll fit with just a bit of taking in. I couldn't, Catherine protested. You can, and you will, Ida said in a tone that brooked no argument. A woman should feel beautiful on her wedding day. Lord knows the rest of marriage is practical enough without starting it in a dress you've worn 100 times before. Catherine's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet, Ida said briskly. Come by tomorrow, and we'll do the fitting. I'll need to take it in at the waist and probably shorten the hem. You're taller than my Sarah was. They spent the rest of the morning making deliveries and settling accounts. Catherine was gratified to see that word of her work had spread. Several customers went out of their way to compliment Samuel on his improved bookkeeping, and more than one expressed approval of his upcoming marriage. "About time you settled down again," Sam said. "Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher, when they stopped to deliver a repaired bell for the schoolhouse. A man needs a wife, and that boy of yours needs a mother's influence." "Catherine's doing well by both of us," Samuel agreed, and the pride in his voice made Catherine's cheeks warm. But not everyone was approving. At the general store they encountered Marcus Bowen, the man Samuel had mentioned once in passing as a competitor from Cheyenne. Bowen was younger than Samuel, perhaps 35, with the kind of practiced charm that made Catherine instinctively wary. Sam Bowen said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "Heard you're getting married. Congratulations." "Thank you," Samuel said neutrally. Bowen's gaze shifted to Catherine, assessing her with an intensity that felt invasive. "This must be the mail-order bride." "From Philadelphia, isn't it, Miss Catherine Sullivan?" Catherine said evenly, declining to rise to the bait in his tone. "Quite a risk," Bowen continued, addressing Samuel now, "taking on a wife you barely know, especially with the Forge doing so well." He paused significantly. "The way it's doing." "The Forge is doing fine," Samuel said, his voice hardening. "For now," Bowen agreed. "But winter's long, Sam. Lots of things can happen. Competition's getting fierce. Some might say you need to be focusing on business, not on romantic entanglements." "Good thing I've got someone who can handle the business side," Samuel said. "Frees me up to focus on the work itself." Bowen's smile tightened. "We'll see how that works out." He tipped his hat to Catherine. "Ma'am, pleasure meeting you. Welcome to Wyoming. I hope you find it," he paused, "everything you expected." After Bowen left, Samuel's expression remained dark. "Ignore him," he said. "Marcus has been trying to buy my forge for 2 years. Thinks if he can pressure me into selling, he'll have a monopoly on blacksmith work from here to Cheyenne." "What kind of pressure?" Catherine asked carefully. "The usual," Samuel said. "Undercutting my prices when he can, trying to convince my suppliers to sell to him instead. Spreading rumors about the quality of my work." He met her eyes directly. "Nothing I can't handle. But I wanted you to know. Marcus doesn't take kindly to anything that makes my position stronger, and you—" He paused. "You make my position considerably stronger." "Because I can manage the business," Catherine said, understanding. "Because you're smart and capable, and you see things I miss." Samuel corrected. "That makes us harder to compete with, and Marcus knows it." Catherine filed this information away. Marcus Bowen was a problem, but not an immediate one. Right now she had a wedding to prepare for. What she didn't know yet was how close Bowen would come to destroying everything they were building, or how her own vigilance would be the thing that saved them. Saturday arrived with a flurry of activity. Eli cleaned the house from top to bottom without being asked, his nervous energy channeled into scrubbing floors and washing windows. Samuel worked at the forge, completing the orders that couldn't wait, his hammer ringing with steady purpose. And Catherine went to Ida's for the dress fitting. The gown was beautiful, far finer than anything Catherine had ever worn. Cream silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs fitted at the waist and flowing to the floor in soft folds. Ida had been right about the alterations needed. The waist was too loose and the hem too long, but Ida's practiced hands made quick work of the adjustments. "You're thin," Ida observed, pins held between her lips as she marked the hem. "Don't you eat?" "Not as much as I should have," Catherine admitted. "Money was tight in Philadelphia. Won't be tight here," Ida said firmly. "Sam's Forge does good business, and with you managing the books, it'll do better. You'll fill out once you're eating regular." The alterations took most of the afternoon. While Ida sewed, Catherine helped in the kitchen, learning the rhythms of cooking for boarders, the way Ida could stretch ingredients to feed a dozen people without anyone feeling shortchanged. "Marriage is work," Ida said at one point, echoing Reverend Hayes' words. "But it's good work if you choose the right partner. My George, God rest him, drove me half mad with his stubbornness. But he was loyal and honest, and he never made me feel small. That's what matters. Not romance or grand gestures, but daily kindness and mutual respect." "Did you love him?" Catherine asked. Ida considered this. "Not at first," she said honestly. "Ours was an arranged marriage, same as yours in a way. But love grew over time, built on shared work and shared troubles and the knowledge that we were facing life together. By the time George died, I loved him so much it nearly killed me to lose him." She looked at Catherine directly. "That's the kind of love worth having. The kind you build, not the kind you fall into." "I hope Samuel and I can build that," Catherine said quietly. "You will," Ida said with certainty. "I've seen how he looks at you. And more importantly, I've seen how you look at each other when you're working together. That's the foundation, dear. The rest will follow." That evening, Catherine returned to the Forge house with the finished dress wrapped carefully in muslin. Samuel and Eli had prepared dinner, a somewhat chaotic affair involving burned potatoes and undercooked chicken, but the effort touched Catherine more than a perfect meal would have. "We tried," Eli said apologetically, surveying the damage. "And I appreciate it," Catherine said. She rolled up her sleeves. "Let me show you a few tricks. Next time it'll be better." They worked together to salvage the meal, and in the process, Catherine taught Eli the basics of temperature control and timing. Samuel watched from the doorway, a small smile playing at his lips. What Catherine asked, catching his expression. "Just thinking," Samuel said. "This is what it's going to be like, the three of us figuring things out together, making mistakes and fixing them." He paused. "I like it." "So do I," Catherine admitted. That night, unable to sleep, Catherine sat at the kitchen table and wrote to her sister Mary. The letter was long and detailed, explaining everything that had happened since she'd left Philadelphia. The blizzard, the forged Samuel, and Eli, the decision to marry. She tried to convey not just the facts, but the feeling of rightness, the sense that despite the speed and the strangeness, this was exactly where she was meant to be. She sealed the letter and set it aside to post on Monday after the wedding. Then she sat for a while longer, looking around the small house that would soon be truly hers. The simple furniture, the scarred table, the cast-iron stove that radiated steady heat. None of it was grand or elegant, but it was solid and real and built to last. Like the life she and Samuel were forging together. Like the future they were about to begin. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter day that made the world look clean and new. Catherine woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves that had nothing to do with doubt and everything to do with the magnitude of what was about to happen. Ida arrived at 9, the wedding dress over her arm and a determined expression on her face. "We have 5 hours," she announced. "Time enough to make you beautiful." The transformation took place in Catherine's small room. Ida helped her bathe, then washed and arranged her hair in a style far more elaborate than Catherine's usual simple bun. The dress slipped on like it had been made for her, the alterations perfect. Ida added a borrowed string of pearls and a pair of delicate earrings. When Catherine finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back was elegant, poised, almost beautiful. Not the threadbare factory worker from Philadelphia, but someone new, someone worthy of the life she was entering. "Samuel's going to lose his ability to speak," Ida predicted with satisfaction. At 1:30 they left for the church. Samuel and Eli had gone ahead and Catherine rode with Ida in the boarding house wagon. The streets of Silverstone were quiet, most people already at church or preparing to attend. The church was fuller than Catherine had expected. Word had spread, and it seemed half the town had come to witness the marriage of Samuel Crawford and his mail-order bride. Catherine recognized faces from the week's accounting visits. Garrett from the general store, Mrs. Patterson the schoolteacher, Donovan whose mare Catherine had helped treat. Others she didn't know, but who smiled at her with a warmth that suggested approval. Samuel stood at the front of the church with Reverend Hayes, and when Catherine entered on Ida's arm, his expression transformed. Ida had been right. He looked like he'd forgotten how to speak, his eyes wide, and fixed on Catherine with something like wonder. Eli stood beside his father wearing his best clothes and looking older than his 16 years. When Catherine reached the front of the church, Eli gave her a small encouraging nod that steadied her nerves. The ceremony was simple and traditional. Reverend Hayes spoke about working together and commitment, about choosing each day to honor the vows they were about to make. Then came the promises themselves. "Samuel, do you take Catherine to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish. Till death do you part, I do. Samuel said, his voice steady and sure. Catherine, do you take Samuel to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part? Catherine looked into Samuel's eyes and saw her future there, saw collaboration and respect and the possibility of love built on a foundation of mutual trust. I do, she said clearly. The rings were simple gold bands, nothing fancy. But when Samuel slipped one onto Catherine's finger, the weight of it felt significant, permanent, real. By the power vested in me, Reverend Hayes intoned, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Samuel, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was brief and chaste, appropriate for the setting, but Catherine felt the promise in it, the commitment. They would build on this beginning, she and Samuel, and create something neither could have achieved alone. The congregation applauded as they turned to face the assembled townspeople. Catherine saw approval on most faces, curiosity on others, and on a few, including Marcus Bowen, standing in the back, something harder to read. But it didn't matter. She was Catherine Crawford now, wife of Samuel's stepmother to Eli, partner in the forge business and in life itself. The gathering afterward was held at the forge house, with Ida organizing the food and Eli managing the flow of guests. People brought dishes to share, and soon the small house overflowed with neighbors and customers, all eager to wish the newlyweds well. Catherine found herself surrounded by women offering advice, some practical, some amusing, all well-meant. Samuel stood nearby, accepting congratulations from the men with a quiet pride that made Catherine's heart warm. Around 4 o'clock, as the winter sun began its early descent, the last guests departed. Ida stayed to help clean up, but even she eventually left with a meaningful look and instructions for Catherine to get some rest. Finally, the house was quiet, just Catherine and Samuel and Eli standing in the kitchen amid the remains of the celebration. I should, Eli said, then stopped looking uncomfortable. I should give you two some time. I'll be at the forge if you need me. He left quickly, and Catherine and Samuel found themselves alone. The weight of what had just happened, the enormity of the commitment they'd made, seemed to fill the space between them. I know we agreed to this for practical reasons, Samuel said finally. Building together, not romance. But Catherine, I want you to know, he paused, searching for words. I'm going to try to be a good husband, not just a business partner, but someone you can rely on, someone worthy of your trust. I believe you, Catherine said, and I'll try to be a good wife, for you and for Eli both. Samuel reached out and took her hand, the one wearing his ring now. We're going to make this work, he said. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Together, Catherine agreed. The years unfolded like the petals of the iron rose, each one adding depth and texture to the life Catherine and Samuel built together. 10 years passed in the rhythm of forge work and family life. Eli, now 26, had married a rancher's daughter named Sarah and worked the forge alongside his father with the easy competence of a master craftsman. Their first child, a boy they named Samuel after his grandfather, toddled around the forge yard under Catherine's watchful eye. But it was Emma, Catherine and Samuel's daughter, who most resembled her mother. At 9 years old, she already kept meticulous records of the household expenses in a ledger Catherine had given her, her small, careful handwriting tracking every penny with an accountant's precision. The forge had grown beyond Samuel's early dreams. What had been a struggling one-man operation now employed 3 full-time smiths and did business as far as Denver. Catherine's financial management had transformed the enterprise, and the locked box that once held $2.15 now contained savings enough to weather any storm. Marcus Bowen's forge in Cheyenne had closed 5 years earlier, unable to compete with the Crawford reputation for quality and fair dealing. The attempted sabotage he'd planned, the fire he'd meant to set, had been discovered before it could succeed, and Bowen had left the territory in disgrace. Catherine had been the one to notice the discrepancies in their coal deliveries, the strange man asking questions about their schedules. Her vigilance had saved everything they'd built. On their 10th anniversary, Samuel and Catherine stood on the rise above the forge, watching the sun set over the valley. Samuel's hair was fully silver now, and Catherine's showed its first threads of gray. But their hands clasped together were as steady as the iron they worked. "We did it," Samuel said quietly. "Built something that matters." "We're still building," Catherine corrected. "Emma's watching, learning. This doesn't end with us." The decades continued their steady march. By 1925, Samuel was 82 and Catherine 64. The forge had passed primarily to Eli, though Samuel still worked when his hands allowed unable to fully abandon the craft that had defined his life. Emma had married a banker from Cheyenne and brought her accounting expertise to managing not just the forge, but a network of businesses throughout Wyoming. They had 12 grandchildren between Eli and Emma's families, and the forge house had been expanded twice to accommodate the gatherings that happened every Sunday after church. The original building stood at the center, but wings had been added rooms for visiting family, a proper office for Catherine's ever-expanding record-keeping. On a spring morning in 1926, Samuel woke before dawn as he had for 60 years. He dressed quietly, not wanting to wake Catherine, and made his way to the forge. The fire was already burning, tended by Eli's oldest son. Samuel stood watching the flames, remembering the blizzard night when a half-frozen woman had stumbled through his door and changed everything. He never made it back to the house. Catherine found him an hour later, seated on the bench outside the forge, his face peaceful. He had simply stopped his strong heart, finally worn out by 8 decades of hard living and harder work. The funeral filled the church beyond capacity. Samuel Crawford had been a fixture of Silverstone for over 50 years, and the town turned out to honor him. But it was Catherine's eulogy that people remembered, her voice steady despite the tears that ran unchecked down her weathered face. "He gave me a chance when I had nothing," she said. "Respect when I expected only charity. A home when I was lost in a blizzard, literally and figuratively. We had 41 years together. It wasn't nearly enough, but I'm grateful for every single day." Catherine lived another 14 years running the forge business with Emma's help until she was 79. She never remarried, though several men tried to court the wealthy widow Crawford. On cold winter nights, she would sit by the fire with the iron rose on the table beside her, running her fingers over the petals Samuel had spent 50 hours creating for a woman he'd never met. She died quietly in her sleep in February 1940 and was buried beside Samuel on the rise above the forge. Their joint headstone read simply, "Samuel and Catherine Crawford, partners, builders, beloved." By 1985, the Crawford Forge had been in continuous operation for 100 years. The original building still stood, now a museum and workshop where the family maintained the traditional blacksmithing techniques Samuel had perfected. The business itself had evolved, expanding into metalwork and sculpture, but every piece still carried the Crawford mark of quality. On a summer day, Samuel's great-great-granddaughter, another Catherine, gave a tour to a group of visitors. She was 24, the same age as her namesake had been when she'd stepped off that train in Silverstone so many years ago. "This is the iron rose," she said, gesturing to the display case that held the forge's most treasured artifact. "My great-great-grandfather made it in 1885 for a woman he'd been corresponding with but had never met. It took him 50 hours to complete. Every petal was shaped by hand, heated and hammered, until the metal became art." She paused, looking at the delicate metal flower that had survived a century unchanged. "They were married for 41 years, she continued. "Built this forge together from almost nothing. My great-great-grandmother's account books are in the next room if you want to see them. Every transaction recorded in her own hand. She ran the business side while he worked the metal, and together they created something that's lasted 4 generations, and counting." A tourist raised her hand. "Is the story true about the blizzard?" Every word, Catherine confirmed. She walked 2 miles through a blizzard because the man who was supposed to meet her was late. She nearly died. And then she saved his business, married him, and they built all of this. She gestured at the thriving workshop, the museum, the family legacy visible in every carefully preserved tool and ledger. "That's remarkable," the tourist said. "That's what happens when 2 people choose to build something together," Catherine corrected. "When they work side by side through every challenge and never stopped forging ahead. She picked up a modern piece the current smiths were working on, a decorative gate for the new city hall. "We still use the techniques he developed," she said, "still follow the principles she established for the business. They showed us that quality and integrity matter more than quick profits, that a life built on honest work and mutual respect can outlast anything." The tour ended at the original forge, where a plaque told the story in brief. But Catherine always added the details the plaque couldn't capture: the blizzard, the iron rose, the collaboration that had transformed two strangers into the foundation of a family dynasty. As the tourists filed out, Catherine stood alone for a moment in the forge that had started everything. The fire still burned in the same massive brick structure Samuel had built with his own hands. The anvil still bore the marks of a century of impact, and in the display case the iron rose caught the afternoon light, its petals as perfect as the day they'd been forged. "Some loves are forged in fire," Catherine thought, repeating the words that had become the family motto. "Those last forever." She touched the glass case gently, a gesture of respect for the great-great-grandparents she'd never met, but whose choices had created the life she now lived. Then she turned and walked back to the modern workshop where the next generation of Crawfords was learning to shape metal and build legacies that would outlast them all. The iron rose remained a permanent testament to 50 hours of hope, a lifetime of working together, and a legacy that would never wilt, never fade, never die. Just like the love that had created it, just like the commitment two strangers had made on a cold Sunday in 1885. Just like the family that had grown from that single choice to walk through a blizzard and build something real on the other side. The forge fire burned steady and bright, as it had for a century, as it would for centuries more. And the iron rose, forever unchanged, forever beautiful, stood watch over it all.